Hi everyone, welcome. Last time we checked in on these two red wiggler worm bins, they were still, at that time, 2 weeks ago, the newest systems of mine, but since then we've launched off a number of newer systems, so these systems are no longer the new kids on the block. These bins have been around now for 61 days, effectively 2 months, and a couple weeks have passed since the last check-in. And the last check-in consisted of a pretty small feeding, so I figured they're probably due for another one today. So I'm going to get them up on the bench, and we're going to get them fed. So let's get to work. I jotted a few stats down about these two systems here on this information board, but I think we've covered the majority of it. Perhaps the only thing we've not yet mentioned is the fact that these systems have been fed 5 times, so today is going to be feeding number 6, and on the menu is some bread, but this is gluten-free bread, so it's not flour, so it's not wheat. It's one of these kind of multi-grain type of sandwich breads. So it's probably made up of different types of nuts and seeds and stuff like that. So I don't even know if multi-grain is the right word for it, because if it's gluten-free, it probably doesn't have grains in it. I think it is some sort of a different labeling, but I can't remember exactly what it said on the label. We classified the last feeding as being a leafy feeding, because not only did we provide them with a nice top covering of leaves, as you could see some remains of over here, we also provided them with a good bit of leafy matter down in the feeding zone, right beneath where we placed in their feeding. And I did recently replenish my supply of leaves, so I thought we would do the same again today. Give them a nice generous helping of leaves. But the leaves all went in dry, and it did kind of make me wonder if the leaves would get hydrated, mainly because the systems are covered in plastics, meaning that any moisture in the systems that would otherwise be lost to evaporation are forced to recirculate. And it does seem like some of these top covering leaves didn't really get much of it. I guess what I'm curious of is the leaves that were placed below the feeding zones. The feeding zones were right down the middle over here. I think we fed coffee, cantaloupe, and banana peels. So after 14 days, it's fair to expect that very little of that would remain. Perhaps some of the banana peel, and maybe some of the leaves. But then again, don't forget, leaves are pretty much probably on the top of the list of favorite foods for the worms. So in a way, when I'm putting leaves into my systems, can I classify that application of material as sort of a boost to the bedding? It does also, in the back of my mind, register as extra food too. And it certainly seems like they've managed to do a pretty good job working through what was put in here last time. I mean, I certainly see some leftovers of the leaves that were placed in here, and they don't seem dry, which is kind of what I thought we might be encountering when we got in here. It does seem like by being down here amongst all the damp castings, not to mention the fact that, you know, we placed some juicy bits of cantaloupe melon on top of the leaves last time, it does seem like those leaves managed to absorb some of the moisture from the surrounding materials and the foods and get damp enough so that the worms could use the stuff not only as bedding but also as food. You know, I don't know if you could see it right there. There's a flying insect. Here's another one. And I think before we go any further disturbing the material in these systems, usually I like to try to apply this stuff to the material that's resting right out on the top surface, because my assumption that is if there are any flying insects trying to occupy the space, then they're probably not burrowing down deep into the material. So here, undisturbed for the most part, this is where my target audience for this stuff is. The stuff that I'm putting in is mosquito dunks solution. The the stuff that you might use yourself if you've got property with standing water where you don't want mosquitoes to be breeding and multiplying. The stuff does work on controlling other flying insects such as gnats and fruit flies. And something new that I learned this past week from the comments that the viewers provide is that you can't really keep this stuff around for too long, you know, because the way I prepare this stuff, I've got this old milk jug, and I created this little tea bag sort of contraption where I've got a piece of fabric into which I put a piece of that mosquito dunks, and then this is what I put into that squirt bottle that you just saw a moment ago. And the stuff can't really sit around for too long. Basically, after a month, it loses its effectiveness. And I think that's the reason over the past, say, month and a half or so, perhaps longer, I've been attempting to do away with these flying insects in the one system of mine where I have definitely seen issues with these little guys. That's in the vermi bag that I showed you earlier, resting right next to where these bins are on the shelf over there. The vermi bag has been having a pretty major problem with flying insects taking over in a way over there. And it was less than a week ago that I finally whipped up a fresh batch of that stuff and started applying it. And it does seem like I'm finally on the road to recovery with the flying insects in the vermi bag. However, all the rest of my systems have not yet really gotten any of this new batch that we just prepared. So here's the stem of a banana. Sort of what I was expecting to find, some leftovers of banana peel, but when we excavated bin number 1 over there, we didn't really see a whole lot of that. But then again, I was kind of probably running my mouth and not paying attention. There's probably some banana peel around here too, but let's not go crazy trying to hunt down leftovers from previous feedings. I think we're ready to give them today's feeding. And you know, these top covering scraps of newspaper certainly don't have the they just don't have what it takes anymore to be used as top covering. They're pretty much shredded. So we'll just supplement our supply of bedding with that stuff too. And I think just based on what we saw here, putting dry leaves down underneath a feeding should be a-okay, because it does seem like it will manage to absorb moisture into itself and become stuff that the worms can certainly take advantage of. So let's see, we got one spare piece here. We'll put these little chunks down here, and then we'll just try to split the remaining piece evenly. I got grit. The grit that I use in my worm bins is this pulverized eggshell, and it does seem like, I don't know, to me it's just a habit when I put bread in my systems anymore, because in the past when I've fed any sort of bread type products into my systems, the stuff could either go into the systems thoroughly dampened, in which case the worms are able to get to work on it almost right away and do away with this stuff. But in the past I've also placed bread into my worm bins dry, and then I'll come back and sometimes the stuff appears to have remained untouched. So as long as my squirt bottle's here, I figured let's dampen the bread and give it to them. So now, one thing we deliberately intentionally and deliberately didn't do last time was we didn't even inspect the outer edges of these bins. We just figured let's leave the outer edges in peace, at least one go around. So today we'll definitely take this as an opportunity to go out there now and till up the material, see how things look. And while we're out there lifting up material, we could drag some of it in to help cover up the feeding zone. It's always nice to see a good number of worms hanging out, and that's what we've got out here in the outer edges. Even though this is not where the last feeding was applied, there's still a good many worms hanging out in the outer edges. And the material out here has got a good moisture level to it too. which is also good. All right. This is also, I guess, our opportunity to take any leftover leaves from the last time we fed and sort of blend it in. The stuff that was still remaining out on the top surface, what little of it did remain still, and what little bit of leafy matter remained down in the feeding zone that we excavated when we opened up the feeding zone. So I think by blending that stuff in, we kind of do a good deed for the system in general by blending in little bits of bedding material out into the areas outside of the feeding zone. So things look good on the outer edges. Sometimes I do wonder if it does actually do the outer edges good to just be left alone for a little while. So here and there I'll just deliberately try to break away from my normal routine of pretty much looking through the entire system and just skipping the tilling up and aerating of the outer edges for a feeding or two. And on this go around, it did seem like, after definitely skipping it last time, perhaps even more than just last time, I can't remember if perhaps even the previous time to that we might have done the same. It seemed like today we could indulge our curiosity and see how things on the outer edges are looking. And I like the look of what's going on here. One thing I'm definitely noticing is the overall moisture level here in bin number 1 seems pretty high. So my concerns about adding all this dry bedding underneath the feeding and out over the top surface, my concern was that we were going to send the system into a much drier state than is comfortable for the worms, but there was certainly no signs of that happening here. So my concerns were certainly unnecessary, and it also seemed like it would be nice to leave some of these castings that have stuck to my gloves in the bins rather than rinsing them down the drain. So as long as we're going to be placing leaves down into the bins, we could use some of this stuff as sort of a scrub brush to clean off my gloves and return this material to the worm bins. So I've got no coffee to feed them today, so typically used coffee filters are what we end up deploying as feeding zone indicators to show us where we last fed, but I don't think it's going to be necessary here. There are a few systems where I've deviated from my normal routine of feeding down the middle, and in those systems it makes sense to mark where we last fed, especially the systems where the feeding zone keeps switching from place to place, but places where we're just sticking to the normal routine of feeding down the middle, I think we'll be able to find our way back without too much trouble. So I also thought it might be a nice thing to drop in a little bit more of this Mosquito Dunks BTI solution out here on the top surface before covering up, so that those little flying insects that we saw a couple of don't turn into a big outbreak over here. And I'll definitely be adding this stuff to all my systems as a preventative measure, just because what happened in the Vermibag Mini I'd really like to not see happen elsewhere. So that's it for our check-in, everyone, with the now 61-day-old red wiggler bins. Doing really nice over here, I can't complain. Getting feeding number 6, and hopefully they enjoy their little gluten-free bread meal. Look at this. When you see two flying insects stuck together like that, rear end to rear end, that means they're breeding. So hopefully the spray helps. I think it will. All right, everyone, that's it for the check-in. Hopefully you enjoyed it. I got a few things to take care of getting cleaned up and put away, but I'm not going to keep you around for that because that's boring. Before I go really quick, let me just say thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.